situational awareness. And there's something here that when I've mentioned this to people, they've missed it. And it's not their fault. But the language people, when I put situational awareness up here, the AP language people, all of y'all are like, oh, rhetorical situation. I got that. Exigence, audience, purpose, boom, boom, boom. I know that. Yeah, probably. Exigence is new, I guess, but still. Let's talk about what I mean by situational awareness here. So yeah, AP Lang, rhetorical situation. Sure. The very first piece of essential knowledge in the very first unit, on the very first page of the units, is this piece of essential knowledge. The rhetorical situation of a text collectively refers to the exigence, purpose, audience, writer, context, and message. We don't talk about ethos here. We don't talk about pathos here. We're not talking about logos here. But ethos, pathos, and logos are effects, things that affect these parts, different parts of the situation. And again, this is page 1 of unit 1 in the language course and exam description. What a lot of people don't realize, and some literature teachers don't even realize because it's easy to miss, and it's not something we learned a whole lot about, probably in undergrad, is that AP Lit deals with what is called the dramatic situation. It's a structure skill. We could talk about why if you want to have a really nice, nerdy conversation. The dramatic situation of a narrative includes the setting and the action of the plot and how that narrative develops to place characters in conflict or conflicts, and often involves the rising or falling fortunes of a main character or set of characters. Now, I'm not going to ask Becky this because Becky was part of the work. So she could probably tell you, but one of these literally took weeks of back and forth with college professors and experts to write. Language professors and composition professors pretty much agreed that this is the rhetorical situation. But writing this about the dramatic situation and how all the different parts of a text interact in a dramatic situation was hundreds of emails back and forth between people who were helping do the work, experts in the field. But here we have this thing, rhetorical situation, and then the dramatic situation. And again, it is on page 1 of unit 1 in the AP literature course and exam description. But a lot of people overlook it. And I'm not getting on to anybody. I'm not shaming anyone for overlooking it. The language course, you can't teach the course without the rhetorical situation. The literature course, you probably can. I know you can teach the course without the rhetorical situation, without the dramatic situation. But I'm going to encourage you to pay more attention to this. Now, Becky, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to jump in here? What's going through your mind?
Well, in the old language of FRQ 3 on the LET, it was and discuss the meaning of the work as a whole. And there's no way to discuss the meaning of the work as a whole without understanding the dramatic situation.
Yep, that's exactly right. And some of you may say, well, why did you change that language? Well, there's a whole other discussion about why all that language was changed. Someday I'll write a book about all these things that nobody will read. But the interplay between these different parts is really what we're wanting students to do when they write essays too. We don't necessarily just want an essay all about setting or all about plot or all about character or all about conflict. We want to see how, I'm going to use the word from the chat, not a word that we have in the framework, choices, how choices about the setting affect characters and cause characters to do certain things and affect the conflicts and then affect the plot and all vice versa. So these things are all so interconnected. And these may be things that we take for granted. as literary trained people. But we need to really get our students thinking about these things too. So what, Becky, you were saying about idea-driven essays, they're talking about these ideas and they're talking about how different things in the text relating to these bold-faced words, how those different things interact and rely on one another is where we're going to start getting into those really, I think, those idea-driven essays where it's not just strictly formulaic. Now, everyone needs to know formula can work. We're not saying, if your kids are writing formula, it can work. I mean, it can, but if we want to push kids a little bit further, a little bit harder, then we can get beyond that. So
yeah, so
go ahead.
People constantly want to know about the sophistication point. And what Brandon's talking about here is a way of at least kissing at the possibility of the sophistication point.
Yeah, and I love that kissing at. Thank you for that. But I mean, that's exactly right. And so I did something that lots of teachers are probably going to scoff at, but I went on ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT, what are the similarities between the rhetorical situation and the dramatic situation? And the main reason I went on ChatGPT is it was going to search like the whole opus of human thought that it can access on the internet. If I wrote my own, it was going to be based on my experience. So I wanted to see what ChatGPT did. And this is what it gave me. The similarity lies in the shared emphasis on understanding and analyzing the factors that shape communication or storytelling. And the underlines are mine. So factors that shape choices that a writer makes, whether it's in the realm of rhetoric or drama, in this case, fiction. They both highlight the importance of considering, and I love this, broader context to fully grasp possible meanings and effective texts. So I think it's worth talking that, when we say broader context here, in rhetorical situation, we're talking about the broader context of what's happening in that particular situation, that particular context. In literature, we're thinking about the broader context of the whole work, but we could also be connecting to something beyond that. So let's move on a little bit here. So this is where I'm going to start. I've started asking teachers to really get kids to think about situational awareness. Now, this is a psychological term. It's a human resources term. But we're gonna do what English people do. We're going to co-opt it and make it our own. And just getting students to think about situation anytime they read something. So where I'm reading a novel, I'm thinking, what is this character's situation? But maybe I'm reading a novel and thinking, okay, this was written when, and how's it responding to that situation? But also then when I'm reading a nonfiction text. So take a gander at this cartoon. Sorry about the clarity here, but look at this cartoon for a moment. Now, somebody in the chat, tell me, what about the situation is the speaker missing? What about the situation is the speaker missing? How bad it is that they're going to crash. I think Joe's onto something there. Yeah, he's assuming. Yeah, Kelly, there you go. He's assuming he is right. He's assuming he has everything and knows everything he needs to know. And sometimes our students do this. Sometimes we do this. I mean, if you've ever had to go back and reread a chapter or reread a paragraph of something because you learned something later, you're like, oh, I realized I was reading that wrong. Okay, so this is kind of Occam's razor. Let's not assume that there are goats in the cloud bank. Let's assume that I am really close to the mountain, because which one is more likely to happen? And so the situational awareness, I looked up the definition of it, and I really liked this discussion. It's like having a mental radar constantly scanning your surroundings. It's the ability to perceive, process, and comprehend relevant information about what's happening around you. This awareness extends beyond just recognizing the immediate environment. It also involves understanding that, here's that term we looked at previously, broader context, potential threats, and implication of different situations. So I didn't think that worked completely for an English class. So I've changed it up a little bit, and I'll show you here in just a moment. But let's return to our airplane. We might imagine this cartoon happening in the back. What is the person missing in this situation? This is something my 11-year-old would do. What's the person missing in this situation? All right, for sake of time, I want to make sure Becky has enough time to do her part here. The context of everything else around him. That's right, Brandy. I mean, does this person not see the O2 canister? Does this person not know about what's going on up ahead of them? Right. Yeah. And Brandy says, this is my 12-year-old. Well, I'm glad I'm not alone, Brandy. But exactly, his priorities are wrong. So are we asking students, and this is how I change it, are we asking students to have a mental radar on as they read? Constantly scanning different things that are happening to characters, different things that might be a result of the situation that the characters are in. It's the ability to perceive, process, and comprehend relevant information about the context of your reading. This awareness extends beyond just recognizing the parts of the context. It also involves understanding that broader context. And I like this, where up here it said potential threats. I put potential other ways of thinking, other interpretations, or other, or in the language class, the counter argument. And to what Becky said earlier, those things are starting to